Yesterday, I talked a little about history and how I think seeing history, seeing political history through the lens of what the mechanisms of violence were at that time is gonna make history clearer to you. You're gonna understand it better. And so I guess my argument was people were tending to look at it, you know, the wrong way, meaning ideas first, ideas predominated and things shaped around them. And that's kind of the wrong lens through which to see that. So today I want to do something similar with religion, and I want to suggest that you can understand religion better. People tend to look at it through the incorrect lens, which is again the lens of ideas. We look at ancient historical religions, particularly pagan religions that sacrifice things, and we tend to think, well, what were they trying to do? It doesn't really obviously no God was gonna give them favor for performing some ritual or something like that. So we tend to think of them as sort of wrong-headed, which I mean they were obviously, unless there's something I don't know about. I don't think any sacrifice ever led to a divine force giving favor on any group of people. But I think it's better to ask why did these kind of religions succeed? Why were they everywhere? When Europeans came across the Atlantic in the 15th and 16th century, the Aztecs and the Incas, they also had these very ritualized religions. So why did they succeed? And the answer to that, I think, is that religion solved the problem of bonding larger groups of people together who otherwise would have fought, kind of expanding beyond natural tribal boundaries. And I'll explain that. I'll explain that now. There's something hardwired in our head called the Dunbar number, and the Dunbar number is 150 tops, and that's the amount of people who we can see as like allies, as we can form bonds with, and that's hard. That's biology. That evolved for some reason. The reason for that, I think, is pretty clearly that 150 represents kind of this genetic sweet spot. That's a tribe that's going to be out to my third, maybe fourth cousins, and third, fourth cousins procreating with third and fourth cousins apparently has no noticeable genetic problems. And if there was any in cultures with very high birth and high death rates, those problems would tend to. So anyway, that's like a genetic sweet 150, right? Those are my people. That's how how we sort of evolved to see ourselves. And the way that worked is that once the tribe got big, people were willing to be altruistic to their cousins, their second cousins, their siblings, their uncles. I would be willing to bring more firewood to the fire pile that I used because I'm willing to sacrifice. The people in that tribe are going to they're willing to be altruistic. Once that tribe gets too big, and suddenly it's your fourth, it's your fifth cousin who's the tribal chief, people would start to notice, hey, more resources are being taken away from my clan and things like that. And the tribe, there'd be tension and the tribe would split. It would become smaller, and then altruism would hopefully then be restored. And that process took place thousands and thousands and thousands of times throughout our evolutionary history and predated us as humans. That's basically how a primate group works. So here's the thing. Like, here's the key back to this idea of what was successful versus what wasn't successful. At some point, when tool use got sophisticated enough, it became tribes that were able to become larger and more specialized were more successful. So tribes are able to somehow bridge that 150 gap, bond together, have teams of archers, teams of fortification builders, and this was even back in the hunter-gathering days. Just these, the arrowhead makers were that's all they did. These more specialized tribes that just allowed for more success. It allowed for more success against other tribes, and then also in things like hunting and what have you. These kind of people acting in their specialties proved to be just a more effective way of doing business. But how do they bridge that 150 Dunbar number? How do they get past that problem of family clans kind of jockeying for position and primacy? And the first answer to that is they didn't. Kind of inter-clan rivalry is all throughout human history. I mean, it defined Europe for about 1,000 years, and so that never went away. It didn't go away. But what religion did is it allowed people to still ally themselves in large. So even if there was that inter-clan rivalry, they were still willing to say, okay, I'm willing to accept you as my people. The Old Testament with the 12 Hebrew tribes and the problems that they had with one another before finally kind of bonding together, which was a process, and it seemed like it took several hundred years. They were still, worshiping calves and things like this, or there was idol worship. It took them a while to really homogenize, and that's probably a fairly good description of how things worked back then. You had these, various tribes that otherwise would have been fighting with one another, but it became to their advantage now to pool their resources. But how did they bridge that rivalry, that interfamily rivalry? Religion. Now we are all, going back to the Old Testament, children of Yahweh, or whatever their religion happened to be. The sons of Heracles, like the Spartans who came into the Peloponnese. I mean, these kind of ancestors became more intense. It wasn't just the great grandfather who we kind of all sort of remember, and he led us to this land, and we have a toast to him at dinner. Now that ancient ancestor just became more powerful because we had to bond bigger groups together. We had to all be the same for some reason, and that reason became these increasingly powerful ancestors who needed to put down increasingly exacting rules, because the more people you have, the more rules you need. It's not just kind of you're operating on instinct, like he killed my family member, I kill his. Now you need all these rules and things like that, and religion provided those and allowed these groups to work in concert in bigger numbers, and that's basically it. That's why religion worked. And I mean, the more potential tension there was, the bigger the group you're trying to bind together was, the more you needed this severity, the more you needed this, maybe human sacrifice and more intense things. And I think also the priestly caste became a sort of in many cultures, the priestly caste has been a way for lower members of society to ascend, or the priestess caste. It was certainly like that in Christian Europe. It was a way that a person of lower status could elevate themselves if they had enough talent, through the priesthood. I think it provided that also. Once tribes started to get too bigger, you had this kind of second locus of power. People could take faith in the fact that, well, that king may be like my, I can't even tell what my relations to him are. So that's a problem. But this priestly caste, well, I could be a priest. I could potentially become a high priest, or my son or daughter could potentially become a high priest, or something like that. So it kind of eased these calcified social layers. It allowed people to feel more invested. Okay, that may not be my king. He may not be the guy I want, but that priest, that's my priest. So yeah, it added a second kind of unifying locus of power for these larger groups. It proved effective, and again, there's no you have to think about what worked and what didn't work. There was no rational atheist society, 4,000 years ago that we know of. I mean, there may have been, but there's no evidence of that. Nobody's found it. And the probable reason for that is that, life was like bitter fight, do or die. You needed allies, or they would kill you. I mean, life was constant battle, constant warfare, and kind of very grounded, kind of dull ideas about, logic and reason and this type of thing. That's not, that wasn't going to motivate, or would have been likely to motivate too many, late Paleolithic hunter warriors. They wouldn't have cared about that. Kin and blood and I mean, that was just how everybody on Earth thought and had, since forever before that. So that's why atheist, rational societies, just one never panned out for that reason. That wouldn't have provided the power necessary to kind of engage in this competition, which is not how modern philosophers tend to like to look at things. They tend to like to look at things in terms of ideas and popular ideas. And if things were so brutal, well, that's just because people were just thinking incorrectly. And gee whiz, if I had only been there, I could have explained to them the benefits of this is how a lot of philosophers and historians think. And this is why you tend to get religion tends to be looked at from the theological perspective. Does that make sense? Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it, what's it trying to do? And I would also, a special word, I think, for those on the kind of the hipster thing that tend to look at religion like it was just a way to control people and stuff like that. Well, it was, yeah, but I mean, the thing is, groups that had tight control of their populations and were able to operate in an organized manner beat those that didn't have that, all the time. I mean, it was eat or be eaten, and I don't think today a lot of people really have a sense of what that means. But I mean, you had to be part of a winning group, or a winning group was going to crush you. So all of life was about how to create that alliance, how to create that power structure that's going to be formidable against other power structures. So the whole idea, like all considerations took place within that context. Control of population groups proved successful. The groups that were able to do that, and call it brainwashing, call it whatever you want to, convince them that they needed to go take over this land and slaughter their inhabitants because their tribal god told them to. They proved successful. That proved to be a winning strategy because everybody else took it up as well. So anyway, that's it. I'm kind of repeating myself. Just wanted to touch a bit on religion today. Thanks.